The holiday season is full of familiar sights and sounds, twinkling lights, decorated trees, the smell of baked goods, and the promise of gifts. But have you ever paused to wonder where these traditions actually come from? How they started, and why we keep them, even though the world around them has changed so much? Some of the customs we take for granted have surprisingly complex histories. For instance, decorating a tree indoors wasn't always common, and the idea of Santa Claus as a jolly gift giver took shape over centuries, borrowing from folklore, poetry, and commercial advertising. Even the timing of Christmas, why it's celebrated on December 25th, is a story of negotiation, symbolism, and adaptation rather than a simple historical fact. Many of the practices that feel purely Christmas today actually grew out of older festivals. In Northern Europe, people marked the darkest days of winter with fire, feasting, and communal celebration long before Christmas existed. These rituals were gradually absorbed into Christian observances, reshaped by theology, local culture, and changing social expectations. Over time, what started as public or religious traditions moved into homes, becoming intimate and domestic, with a focus on family, gift-giving, and light in the darkness. In this video, we'll trace these threads. We'll look at where the trees, the lights, the dates, and even the gift givers came from, and see how each tradition reflects both the past and the changing world around it. Along the way, we'll uncover some unexpected stories, showing that Christmas has never been just one thing, but rather a collection of practices, beliefs, and symbols that have evolved over thousands of years. This is the Moonlight Scholar, a place for quiet stories of science, history, and the mysterious corners in between. I hope you will find rest here, and maybe even learn something. If you fall asleep along the way, you can always return later. There are timestamps in the description below, so you can easily find your way back to the story. If you enjoy this video, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and tap the like button. It helps more people discover these quiet stories, and you might just make it a little easier for another sleepless person to find some calm. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Feel your shoulders relax, your hands resting comfortably, and your feet supported. Breathe in slowly, and then let it out gently. One more time, in and out, letting your body soften into the chair or bed beneath you. And now we are ready to begin our story. When we think of Christmas today, it often seems like a single familiar thing, a season of lights, trees, gifts, and family gatherings. But that appearance of unity is deceptive. Christmas, as we know it, didn't emerge fully formed. Instead, it's a patchwork of practices, beliefs, and symbols, each adapted from different sources over centuries. In a way, it's less a single tradition than a negotiated truce between older rituals, religious doctrine, social customs, and even, eventually, commercial interests. To understand this, it helps to start with the midwinter festivals that long predated Christianity. Across northern Europe, people marked the darkest days of winter with feasts, bonfires, and revelry. In ancient Rome, there was Saturnalia, a festival in honor of Saturn, the god of agriculture. It began around December 17th and lasted a week. During Saturnalia, social norms were temporarily relaxed. Slaves could enjoy certain freedoms, gifts were exchanged, and homes were decorated with greenery. Similarly, in the Germanic and Norse regions, there was Yule, a series of celebrations tied to the winter solstice. Communities lit fires to ward off the darkness, held feasts, and honored deities connected to fertility and the sun's return. It's important to note that these festivals weren't Christmas in any sense. They weren't even intended to anticipate Christian ideas. They were responses to seasonal cycles, to human need for warmth, light, and communal comfort during the long winter months. Yet many of the symbols we associate with Christmas today, evergreens, lights, communal feasting, have their structural roots in these earlier observances. They survived because later traditions could incorporate them, not because they were designed to become Christian. Aligning the new Christian holiday with familiar celebrations made it easier for people to accept and adopt. It was less about theological necessity and more about cultural strategy. Early Christian leaders didn't aim to erase the older festivals entirely. Instead, they reinterpreted them. Gift-giving could be framed as honoring the Magi who visited Jesus. Fire and light could symbolize Christ as the light of the world. Feasting became an acceptable way to celebrate the Nativity. By absorbing rather than abolishing existing customs, Christianity allowed these practices to survive in new forms. This process wasn't uniform. Different regions adopted different elements at different times. In some areas, pagan elements lingered more visibly. In others, church authorities suppressed certain behaviors or reshaped them entirely. For example, in medieval England, some winter revelries were heavily regulated by church officials, while in Scandinavia, Yule traditions blended more seamlessly with Christian observances. What we now think of as a single holiday was actually a patchwork of local adaptations, each reflecting its own mix of religious, cultural, and practical considerations. Over time, these practices moved from public to private spaces. In the early medieval period, most celebrations were communal and centered on the local church or village. By the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, Christmas began to take on a more domestic character. Families would gather in their homes, decorations were added indoors, and gift-giving increasingly focused on children. Even then, traditions were not standardized. Different households celebrated differently, influenced by local custom, social class, and personal preference. This diversity helps explain why we sometimes assume traditions come from a single, ancient source. There's a tendency to treat modern practices as if they were passed down unchanged through centuries. In reality, each element of Christmas has been reinterpreted repeatedly. Trees were brought indoors from northern forests in Germany, while the idea of a central figure bringing gifts travelled from St. Nicholas to Dutch Sinterklaas to the modern Santa Claus. Feasts, once designed to honour deities or saints, became opportunities for family gatherings. Lights and decorations shifted from fire and candles to electric bulbs. Each change reflected the needs, values, and technologies of the time. Observing this, it becomes clear that Christmas has never been one thing. It is a living tradition precisely because it can absorb, adapt, and evolve. What looks timeless is actually the product of constant negotiation between religion and culture, public and private life, old practices and new innovations. Each decoration, each ritual, each song is a layer added over time, often reshaped to make sense in a new context. And because these layers coexist, Christmas feels familiar and coherent, even though its components have travelled very different historical paths. Recognizing this doesn't diminish the holiday. On the contrary, it adds depth. When we hang lights, decorate a tree, or exchange gifts, we are participating in a story that spans centuries, continents, and cultures. Every element carries echoes of older celebrations, early religious reasoning, and centuries of adaptation. Even today, Christmas is far from uniform. What feels familiar in one place can be completely different just a few hundred miles away. In parts of Europe, for example, Christmas Eve is the main day of celebration, while in others, gifts arrive on December 6th, St. Nicholas's Day. Some countries emphasize elaborate public markets, others focus on quiet family dinners. Foods vary widely. Roast goose in one region, seafood in another, special breads or pastries elsewhere. Even customs like decorating trees, hanging stockings, or singing carols are not universal. These differences remind us that Christmas has always been flexible, shaped by local culture, climate, and social priorities, and that it continues to evolve with each new generation. The traditions we follow today are part of a long, ongoing process of adaptation and survival. And it is within this process, rather than in some imagined singular origin, that the real story of Christmas begins. At first glance, December 25th seems like an obvious choice for celebrating Christmas. We associate it with snow, lights, and the winter season. But the date was not recorded in any historical account of Jesus' birth. Early Christians didn't celebrate his birth at all. The choice of December 25th was a deliberate decision, shaped by theology, politics, and practical considerations, rather than historical memory. One reason historians suggest for this date involves Roman sun worship. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, the Roman Empire celebrated the birthday of the unconquered sun, or Sol Invictus, on December 25th. This festival marked the return of longer days after the winter solstice and celebrated the sun's power. By aligning Jesus' birth with this festival, church leaders could present him as a new source of light and life, metaphorically and spiritually, while also making the holiday more acceptable to the Roman populace, who were accustomed to midwinter celebrations. Another explanation focuses on symbolic calculations. Some early Christians believed that the date of Jesus' conception coincided with the date of his death. Based on the assumption that he was crucified on March 25th, they calculated that his birth would then fall 9 months later, in December. This method wasn't about literal historical evidence. It was about symbolic alignment. March 25th itself had significance too, sometimes tied to spring equinox celebrations and theological ideas about creation and renewal. By placing the Nativity in December, early Christians connected Christ's life to the cosmic and moral order as they understood it. These competing theories show that the date of Christmas was not chosen by accident. It was a negotiation between meaning and memory, a way to situate Jesus within existing cultural and cosmic frameworks. Aligning the holiday with the cycles of the sun and the calendar lent it authority and resonance, making the abstract idea of Christ's incarnation more tangible to ordinary people. Calendar politics also played a role. Different regions of the early Christian world observed different festivals at different times, and there was no universal agreement on when or even whether Christ's birth should be celebrated. Choosing December 25th helped create consistency across communities, reinforcing the Church's authority and shaping how people experienced the holiday. At the same time, it allowed older customs to continue under new names. Gifts, feasting, and decorations, elements of Saturnalia and other festivals, could be maintained, now framed as expressions of Christian devotion. It's also worth noting that the adoption of December 25th did not erase local variations. In some regions, January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany, remained the main focus for gift-giving and celebration. Other areas held processions, feasts, or rituals at different points in the winter. The date became a unifying anchor, but it didn't standardize practice. Christmas, even with a fixed date, continued to be diverse and adaptable. This history reframes how we think about the holiday. Choosing that date was a way to assert that Christ was the light of the world, the fulfillment of prophecy, and the center of a moral and cosmic order. It was about creating a framework in which people could understand and experience the significance of his life, rather than recording an actual birth date. Understanding this helps explain why Christmas has always been flexible. Its power comes from the meanings it carries, not from any single historical fact. Recognizing the invention of the date also sheds light on later traditions. When families celebrate Christmas today, they are participating in a structure shaped by political, cultural, and theological decisions made over 1,500 years ago. The choice of December 25th gave the holiday coherence, but it didn't determine how people would celebrate it. Feasts, trees, lights, and gift-giving evolved independently, often in ways the early church could not have predicted. Even in modern times, the date does not guarantee uniformity. Different Christian denominations emphasize different aspects of the holiday. In Orthodox communities, Christmas may fall on January 7th, according to the Julian calendar. Cultural interpretations also vary. Some focus on family, others on religious observance, and still others on commercial or social celebration. December 25th is a reference point, but the traditions that surround it remain fluid and context-dependent. Christmas is not simply about remembering a historical event. It's about giving shape and meaning to human experience in the context of culture, religion, and society. And it is within that ongoing negotiation, rather than in any fixed origin, that the story of Christmas continues to unfold. In Germanic and Norse belief systems, certain trees were considered powerful symbols of life and renewal. During the winter months, when the landscape was bare and the days short, evergreens stood out as persistent living forms. Communities decorated homes and public spaces with branches or small trees to honor these qualities, to invite fertility, or to mark seasonal transitions. These practices were part of a larger cosmology in which nature itself held spiritual significance. Evergreens weren't just decorative. In some areas, large trees were erected outdoors for communal gatherings, sometimes associated with local deities or spirits. The Yule tree, for instance, was often linked to Norse mythology, where the world tree, Yggdrasil, connected the heavens, earth, and underworld. Symbolically, evergreens represented continuity and resilience, reminders that life persisted even in the darkest months. These associations made them powerful cultural markers, long before they were incorporated into Christian practice. The transition from sacred symbol to Christian ornament happened gradually and unevenly. Martin Luther is often credited with bringing the first decorated tree indoors. In the 16th century, he reportedly wanted to illustrate the beauty of stars in the night sky to his children. So he placed a tree inside his home and decorated it with candles. This gesture was not merely aesthetic. It reflected an early attempt to reinterpret natural symbolism through a Christian lens. The evergreen, once a marker of pagan ritual and seasonal power, became a symbol of Christ, the eternal light, and the promise of life even in winter. As indoor Christmas trees spread through Germany and neighboring regions, their symbolism evolved further. Bringing the tree inside reflected changes in domestic life and social organization. Public ritual and outdoor festivity gave way to private, family-centered celebration. Houses were increasingly insulated, heated, and structured for comfort, which made indoor trees practical as well as symbolic. At the same time, decoration shifted from simple greenery to lights, fruits, and ornaments. Each addition carried its own layer of meaning, often rooted in older customs but reframed for the home environment. This process shows how nature worship did not disappear. It was domesticated. The evergreen retained its symbolic power, but its expression became compatible with Christian doctrine and urban domestic life. In essence, the tree became a controlled representation of wild, seasonal forces. It allowed people to engage with ancient ideas of life, growth, and continuity, but within a framework that was safe, orderly, and socially sanctioned. The spread of the Christmas tree beyond Germany illustrates how traditions adapt to local conditions. In 19th century Britain, Prince Albert, husband of Queen Victoria, introduced the decorated tree at Windsor Castle. Newspapers printed illustrations, and soon middle-class households across England were placing evergreens in their homes. By the mid-1800s, decorated trees had become fashionable in the United States, brought by German immigrants. The tree's meaning shifted again, now tied not only to Christian symbolism, but also to family celebration, visual spectacle, and social status. Even today, Christmas trees vary widely. Some families use real evergreens, while others prefer artificial ones. Decorations range from simple strands of lights to elaborate themed ornaments. In some cultures, trees are central to holiday rituals, while in others, they are decorative additions rather than spiritual focal points. These differences highlight the tree's adaptability. It has survived for centuries, not because its meaning was fixed, but because it could be reinterpreted in ways that fit new social, cultural, and technological contexts. Looking at the Christmas tree in this light, we can see it as a living historical record. Its presence in homes links us to distant ancestors who celebrated Yule or honoured sacred groves. The candles, lights, and ornaments are visual echoes of earlier practices, carefully translated into new forms. The history of the tree also illustrates a broader pattern in the evolution of Christmas traditions. Practices that survive do so because they are flexible. They can absorb local customs, religious reinterpretations, and technological innovations. The evergreen, once a public spiritual marker, became a private symbolic one. Later, it became a shared cultural icon across continents. By tracing its journey from sacred forest to indoor centerpiece, we see how cultural practices evolve, how old symbols find new life, and how human creativity continually reshapes the way we experience the seasons. Christmas might feel like an unquestionably wholesome holiday today, but for a time it was seen as a time of disorder, excess, and even danger. The idea that a Christian holiday could be morally suspect seems ironic now, but in 17th century England and New England, authorities viewed Christmas as precisely that. During the English Civil War in the mid-17th century, political and religious tensions were at their height. The Puritans, a reform-minded Protestant group, gained influence in Parliament and sought to reshape English society according to their strict interpretation of Scripture. They believed that many traditional practices, including holidays and festivals, encouraged moral laxity and distracted people from true religious devotion. Christmas, with its feasts, games, and communal revelry, became a prime target. For the Puritans, the holiday was associated with drunkenness, disorderly behaviour, and lingering pagan customs, anything but the solemn celebration of Christ's birth that they valued. In 1647, Parliament passed legislation explicitly banning the celebration of Christmas, ordering that December 25th be treated like any ordinary day. Church services for the holiday were forbidden, and public gatherings were suppressed. Enforcement varied by region. but the law reflected a broader attempt to align daily life with Puritan ideals, emphasizing sobriety, piety, and social order. This period demonstrates that even a deeply embedded religious festival could be recast as dangerous when political and moral authorities questioned its impact on society. Across the Atlantic, Puritan settlers in New England adopted similar restrictions. In Massachusetts, celebrating Christmas was illegal for decades. Anyone caught observing the holiday could be fined, and public festivities were discouraged. The concern was that Christmas encouraged drinking, gambling, and disorderly gatherings. Workers might neglect duties, and traditional role reversals, servants or children jokingly taking authority over masters or parents, were viewed as undermining to social hierarchy. For reformers, the holiday was a dangerous blend of immoral behavior and superstition, hardly the solemn celebration of Christ's birth that they envisioned. Part of this critique stemmed from the historical forms of Christmas. As I've mentioned, many customs incorporated elements from older, pre-Christian festivals, like Saturnalia or Yule, which involved feasting, gift exchange, and playful role reversals. These practices were tolerated, even celebrated, for centuries because they reinforced community bonds and seasonal rhythms. But for Puritans, anything resembling indulgence or revelry was suspect. Christmas became a battleground between public custom and religious discipline, illustrating that even widely practiced rituals are never morally fixed. Interestingly, the very characteristics that made authorities wary, noise, feasting, role reversals, also made Christmas resilient. People found ways to celebrate quietly, privately, or under the radar of official regulation. In households across New England, families continued to gather, share meals, and tell stories. These informal observances ensured that the holiday's traditions survived, even when the law condemned them. The tension between control and celebration shaped the way people approached Christmas, emphasizing flexibility and adaptation over strict uniformity. The story also highlights a broader irony. A holiday that today is celebrated as a pinnacle of Christian virtue, focused on family, generosity, and reflection, was once condemned as unchristian. Authorities judged the season by behavior rather than belief. Feasting and gift-giving, when excessive or disorderly, were seen as morally corrupting, even though they were meant to honor Christ. These historical episodes also illustrate how cultural memory works. The behaviors that Puritans condemned, the drinking, games, and role reversals, did not disappear. Instead, they were absorbed, reinterpreted, or relocated within different social contexts. Over time, the focus of Christmas shifted toward family-centered observance, charitable giving, and organized festivity. The idea of a morally correct Christmas has never been universal. What counts as proper celebration depends on social norms, local history, and cultural priorities, just as it did in Puritan England and New England. In looking back at these bands, we see that Christmas is not a neutral or eternal tradition. It is shaped by authority, belief, and cultural negotiation. Its endurance owes as much to flexibility as to faith. The fact that people continue to celebrate, even under legal prohibition, shows that Christmas is sustained by human desire for communal connection, ritual, and seasonal acknowledgement. Authority may attempt to define or suppress a holiday, but the practices themselves persist, adapted to new circumstances. When we think of Santa Claus today, we often imagine a single figure, the jolly man in a red suit delivering gifts on Christmas Eve. But that image is the result of centuries of cultural blending and reinterpretation. Santa Claus, in fact, is a composite character, shaped by history, folklore, and commercial influence, not a direct survival of any one tradition. The earliest inspiration comes from Saint Nicholas, a 4th century bishop from Myra, in what is now Turkey. Known for his generosity, especially toward children and the poor, Saint Nicholas was venerated throughout Europe. Stories of his deeds, secretly leaving gifts for needy families or providing dowries for young women, spread widely, and his feast day on December 6th became an occasion for giving. In the Netherlands, St. Nicholas evolved into Sinterklaas, a figure who rode a horse, carried a staff, and delivered gifts to children in early December. Dutch settlers later brought these traditions to America, laying the foundation for what would become Santa Claus. In England, there was a parallel figure known as Father Christmas. Unlike Sinterklaas, Father Christmas was less concerned with children or gift-giving and more associated with adult festivities, feasting, and general merriment. During the 17th and 18th centuries, Father Christmas was often depicted as a tall, thin man dressed in green or red robes. His role was largely symbolic of the holiday spirit, linking Christmas to celebration rather than religious ritual. Over time, the traits of Sinterklaas and Father Christmas began to merge, influenced by migration and cross-cultural exchange, setting the stage for the American version of Santa Claus. It's also important to remember that the figure we now think of as jolly and kind had origins that could be far less gentle. In many European traditions, gift-bringers were not only rewards for good behavior, but also enforcers of moral conduct. In Germany, the Belsnickel, a fur-clad, sometimes frightening figure, would visit children before Christmas, handing out treats to the well-behaved and swaths or coal to the naughty. Similarly, in Scandinavia, you had Nisse or Tomte, which today are seen as equivalent to the concept of Santa's elves. The beings could bring gifts, but they were also known to play tricks or punish misbehavior. These aspects of the folklore remind us that early Santa-like figures were not purely benevolent. They were part of a system of social and moral guidance, reinforcing the idea that generosity was conditional and that children were expected to behave. Over time, the emphasis shifted toward kindness and cheer, producing the friendly Santa we know today, but traces of these disciplinary roots linger in the naughty or nice tradition. The 19th century was a critical period in shaping Santa into the figure we recognize today. Poems and illustrations played a central role. One of the most influential was Clement Clarke Moore's 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, better known as "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." This poem described Santa as a plump, jolly man, arriving on a sleigh pulled by reindeer, entering homes through the chimney, and leaving gifts for children. Moore's imagery helped standardize Santa's personality and actions, giving him a clear narrative role in the holiday. Illustrations reinforced this image. Artists like Thomas Nast in the mid-19th century drew Santa in newspapers and magazines, adding details such as his North Pole workshop, elves, and the iconic red suit with white trim. These visual cues created a recognizable figure that could be reproduced across the country. By combining Santa Claus, Father Christmas, and Moore's poetic vision, Santa became a symbol of generosity, warmth, and childhood wonder, though not yet the commercialized icon we think of today. This brings us to the role of Coca-Cola, which is often exaggerated in popular accounts. In the 1930s, Coca-Cola commissioned illustrator Haddon Sundblom to depict Santa in advertising campaigns. These images emphasized his red suit, round belly, and friendly demeanor, and they were widely circulated, reinforcing an already established appearance. The Coca-Cola campaign popularized certain visual details, but it did not invent Santa. By that point, the red suit, white beard, and cheerful personality were already well established in American culture. What is perhaps more important than clothing or marketing is what Santa represents. He reflects the social and economic context of industrial society in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Childhood was becoming a distinct stage of life, with new ideas about nurturing, education, and play. Gift-giving moved from practical needs to symbolic gestures of affection and social expectation. Santa, as a figure delivering presents, embodies this shift. He makes generosity visible and concrete, while also linking consumption and culture. The act of giving becomes both personal and public. Santa's adaptability is part of why he has endured. He can be religious or secular, domestic or commercial, playful or moralizing. Families can emphasize different aspects. Some focus on the magical, mischievous side, others on charity and reflection. Across countries and decades, Santa continues to absorb local traditions. In Germany, children may receive gifts from the Christkind or Weihnachtsmann. In Italy, La Befana, a gift-bringing witch, shares some of the same narrative space. Santa is flexible because he was never a single, fixed figure. He is a living cultural construct. Looking at Santa historically, we can also see the interplay between storytelling and belief. Children's literature, poems, and illustrations helped create shared expectations about his appearance and behavior. At the same time, families adapted these narratives to their own context, creating rituals that were locally meaningful. The figure of Santa exists as both a communal story and a private experience, which is part of why he has remained so compelling. It is worth noting that the commercialization of Santa, while visible and often criticized, is only one layer of his history. For every department store display or advertising campaign, there are countless private celebrations where Santa's role is subtle, imaginative, or entirely symbolic. He is a vessel for human creativity, generosity, and ritual, rather than a static character imposed from above. His enduring appeal lies not in a single story, but in the flexibility that allows him to embody the values and fantasies of each generation. From a 4th century bishop in Asia Minor to a Dutch gift-bringer, to the Victorian Father Christmas, to an American symbol of childhood wonder, Santa is a patchwork of influences shaped by poetry, illustration, and social change. He reminds us that even the most familiar figures in our lives are historically contingent, reflecting broader patterns of culture, belief, and social expectation. From the flicker of a candle to the glow of thousands of electric bulbs, light has always been central to Christmas. This may seem obvious today, but the importance of illumination in midwinter celebrations has deep roots, long predating modern Christmas trees or street displays. Across cultures, people have used fire and candles to mark the darkest days of the year, symbolizing hope, life, and continuity. In ancient Europe, midwinter festivals often involved elaborate displays of light. In Scandinavia, Yule logs were burned in homes to symbolize warmth and protection through the long nights. The Romans celebrated Saturnalia with candles and lamps, brightening the short days and creating a sense of ritual continuity. These were not merely decorative, they served psychological and communal functions. Light in darkness reassured people during a time when natural daylight was scarce and survival depended on the endurance of both body and community. Early Christians adapted these symbolic practices to their own framework. The association of Christ with light was already present in Scripture and theology. John's Gospel describes him as the light of the world, and midwinter provided a natural moment to highlight this symbolism. Candles on altars, windows, or trees were not only practical sources of illumination, they carried layers of meaning. The flickering flame could represent Christ's presence, the warmth of faith, or the persistence of life in a world often harsh and unpredictable. By connecting older light rituals to Christian observance, early communities maintained continuity while giving the season a distinct spiritual interpretation. The 19th century brought a technological shift that transformed these symbolic practices into something modern and public. The invention of electric light allowed decorations to move outdoors from private homes to streets, shops, and public squares. In 1882, the first documented electrically lit Christmas tree was displayed in New York City, and by the end of the century, electric lights were spreading in Europe and North America. Unlike candles, these lights were safer, longer lasting, and could be mass-produced. They allowed entire cities to participate in midwinter illumination, turning Christmas into a shared visual spectacle that combined technological innovation with cultural ritual. Electric lights also secularized aspects of Christmas. Once limited to sacred spaces or family gatherings, illumination became a form of civic celebration, a way for communities to mark the season collectively. Storefronts, department stores, and public squares used lights to attract attention, signal festivity, and encourage commerce. Yet even as lights became commercial, they retained echoes of older symbolic meanings. Illumination still represented hope, warmth, and continuity in the darkest time of the year. This continuity explains why Christmas has such enduring appeal. Midwinter is psychologically challenging. Long nights, cold weather, and social isolation can make the season feel oppressive. Light, whether candle, fire, or electric bulb, provides literal brightness, but also a metaphorical one. It reassures people, signals togetherness, and helps structure social and cultural life. The persistence of lights at Christmas demonstrates that traditions survive when they address basic human needs. In this case, illumination meets a deeply felt desire for reassurance and communal visibility during a season of darkness. Light also interacts with other traditions. Consider the Christmas tree. Candles were the first form of indoor illumination on evergreens, and later electric lights replaced them. Decorations, ornaments, and reflective surfaces amplified the visual impact. Streets, windows, and town squares became canvases, transforming the urban environment into a ritual landscape. These displays are not merely decorative, they connect participants to a long chain of cultural practice, linking ancient fires and Yule logs to modern spectacle. The adoption of electric light also illustrates the flexibility of traditions. People integrated technology without losing symbolic meaning. Some families retained candles on windowsills or trees alongside electric lights. Communities created new rituals like lighting ceremonies or public countdowns. The form changed, but the underlying purpose, providing light in darkness, both literal and metaphorical, remained consistent. This adaptability is a hallmark of traditions that endure. Interestingly, light in Christmas traditions also intersects with moral and social norms. Candles and later electric lights encouraged attention to detail, care in display, and responsibility for safety. They created shared expectations. Windows should be lit, trees decorated, public spaces illuminated. Light became both a practical tool and a medium for social cohesion. By engaging with these displays, people participated in a cultural dialogue that reinforced seasonal rhythms and communal identity. Even in contemporary times, the psychology of light remains central. Holiday lights help people cope with winter depression, encourage social gatherings, and structure the rhythm of daily life. Outdoor displays, neighborhood competitions, and illuminated public spaces all continue the ancient practice of marking midwinter with brightness. Modern Christmas lights are a technology, but they are also a ritual, a cultural solution to a universal seasonal challenge. In this sense, Christmas as a technology of light is a perfect example of continuity through adaptation. From Yule logs to candlelit altars to neon-lit streets, humans have consistently used illumination to negotiate the darkness. Each innovation, whether fire, candle, or electric bulb, has preserved the core purpose, providing reassurance, marking time, and structuring communal experience. Light persists because it answers a literal and metaphorical need, bridging practical survival, social connection, and symbolic meaning. For most of its history, Christmas was not what we think of today. It was primarily a public festival observed in churches, town squares, and communal halls. In medieval Europe, the holiday centered on feasts, pageants, and theatrical performances. Streets and public spaces were alive with singing, dancing, and revelry, often stretching across several days. Everyone, from nobility to labourers, participated in collective celebrations that reinforced social bonds, marked the rhythm of the agricultural year, and temporarily overturned everyday hierarchies. In this context, Christmas was noisy, expansive, and often unpredictable. Public feasts included large amounts of food and drink, sometimes leading to disorder, and seasonal plays or mummers' performances might blur the line between sacred observance and entertainment. Children were present, but they were part of the crowd rather than the focus. Gift-giving was sporadic and symbolic, rather than organized or centered on individual children. The holiday emphasized community participation and public spectacle more than private domestic ritual. The shift toward a family-centered Christmas began in earnest in Victorian England. Social and economic changes, urbanization, industrialization, and the rise of the middle class redefined domestic life. Homes became sites of comfort, intimacy, and moral instruction. The celebration of Christmas moved inward toward private households where families could gather safely, away from the unpredictability of public festivities. Fireplaces, decorated trees, and family meals became central, transforming the holiday into an intimate ritual. One of the most significant changes was the rise of gift-giving to children. Victorian society began to view childhood as a distinct stage of life, deserving attention, guidance, and indulgence. Gifts were no longer occasional tokens, they became structured expressions of care and moral instruction. Books, toys, and small treats were carefully chosen, reflecting both the family's values and the child's behaviour over the year. The domestic Christmas reinforced parental authority while also celebrating the joys of family intimacy, creating a new kind of emotional and social labour within the home. Industrialization played a crucial role in shaping these private celebrations. Factories and offices imposed regular schedules, limiting leisure time and creating a need for concentrated periods of festivity. The rhythm of work and production made Christmas one of the few extended breaks for families, heightening its emotional and social significance. Gifts and decorations were purchased rather than improvised, and shops increasingly catered to middle-class families with ready-made toys, festive goods, and decorative items. Industrial time imposed structure, but it also amplified the emotional and symbolic importance of the holiday. Books, magazines, and newspapers helped disseminate domestic ideals. Stories and illustrations depicted children joyfully receiving presents by the fire, families singing carols together, and decorated trees as focal points of home life. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert popularised many of these images through publicised celebrations, which were widely reported. Their example helped standardise domestic rituals, showing families how to celebrate in ways that emphasised home, comfort, and morality rather than public spectacle. The domestic Christmas also redefined social expectations. Women, often responsible for preparing meals, decorating the home, and organising gift-giving, assumed central roles in creating the atmosphere of the holiday. Men, when present, often participated in purchasing gifts and engaging with children. Emotional labour became a core component of the holiday, linking domestic work to moral and cultural values. Celebrating Christmas at home was no longer just about feasting. It was about crafting an environment of care, attention, and ritualized happiness. Yet this domestic transformation did not erase public or communal aspects entirely. Towns continued to light streets, hold parades, or organize charity events. Neighborhoods might participate in caroling or illuminate public squares. Domestic Christmas, therefore, existed alongside and in dialogue with public celebrations. Families internalized and personalized traditions, but these private rituals were still connected to broader social and cultural frameworks, creating a layered experience of the season. This shift also affected the material culture of Christmas. The decoration of homes, from wreaths to trees to ornaments, became a form of personal expression and a sign of social identity. Gift-giving required specialized objects, which encouraged the growth of shops and craftspeople producing Christmas-specific goods. The holiday became a driver of both domestic ritual and economic activity, reinforcing its dual role as emotional and material practice. Even today, the domestic focus shapes how we experience Christmas. The centrality of family meals, gift-giving, and home decorations is a continuation of Victorian ideals adapted to contemporary lifestyles. Technology, electric lights, online shopping, and social media has transformed the logistics of domestic celebration, but the underlying structure remains. Christmas is a time when the home becomes a stage for familial care, celebration, and shared memory. By tracing this evolution, we see how traditions survive through adaptation. Medieval Christmas was communal and public. Victorian Christmas was private and domestic. Both served social needs, but the forms shifted in response to economic, cultural, and technological changes. Today's domestic Christmas reflects continuity with the past, even as it adapts to modern circumstances, showing that traditions endure not because they are fixed, but because they can be reshaped to meet the practical and emotional needs of each generation. Over the course of our journey tonight, we've traced how Christmas grew from ancient midwinter rituals into the rich, layered holiday we know today. We've seen how traditions were borrowed, adapted, and sometimes contested, how lights, trees, gift-giving, and even Santa Claus evolved to meet both cultural and personal needs. From public feasts to private family rituals, from sacred symbolism to secular celebration, Christmas has always been a living tradition, shaped by human imagination and circumstance. We have now reached the end of our story. Perhaps you are already asleep, my voice a faint echo in your dreams. Or perhaps you are still awake, ready for another journey from my library. Thank you for spending this time here. I hope to see you again soon. Until then, good night and happy holidays.